The sun was barely up when the old school bus stopped at the corner of Maple Street. A quiet girl climbed aboard, clutching her worn-out backpack close to her chest. She always sat in the same seat, third from the back right by the window. Her hair fell over her face, hiding her eyes, and she didn't speak unless someone spoke to her first. Every morning was the same. The other students would laugh, share jokes, play music on their phones. She would stare out the window, watching the trees roll by, pretending not to hear them whisper about her. They called her strange, awkward, different. Some said she didn't belong, but the truth was she didn't mind being alone. Silence felt safer than trying to fit in. At school, she moved through the hallways quietly like a shadow. Her clothes were simple, old jeans, a plain shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. She wasn't poor exactly, but her family didn't have much. Her father worked long hours at a repair shop, and her mother took care of her younger brother at home. They lived in a small house that always smelled faintly of oil and laundry detergent. She wasn't the kind of person anyone noticed, except when someone wanted to make a joke. Her desk at the back of the class was often surrounded by laughter, not the friendly kind, but the sharp kind that made your stomach twist. Someone might whisper her name, snicker, or pass a note. Still, she didn't react. She kept her eyes down and waited for the day to pass. When the bell rang, she would head to the library where it was quiet. There, she would sit by the window and pull out her old sketchbook. Its cover was faded, corners bent from being carried everywhere. Inside were pages and pages of drawings, strange, detailed things most people wouldn't understand. She drew metal arms, gears, and tiny screws. She drew diagrams with labels and lines just like something out of an engineering manual. To anyone else, it might look like nonsense, but to her it made perfect sense. She had started drawing them years ago after something happened to her little brother. He was only 6 when the accident took his arm. She remembered the sound of his cry, the rush to the hospital, the long nights afterward. The doctors said he'd have to wait months, maybe years, before he could get a real prosthetic. Even then, it would cost more than her family could ever afford, so she made a promise to herself that night, that one day, she'd build one for him. It sounded impossible. She didn't even know where to start. But she loved solving problems, and she was good at paying attention to small details. So she began sketching, first rough ideas, then more detailed blueprints. Every night after finishing her homework, she'd sneak into the small storage shed behind the house. It wasn't much, just a few tools her father used for work. But it became her secret workshop. She would sit there for hours, surrounded by scraps of metal, broken gadgets, and old plastic toys. She wasn't trying to build something perfect. She was just trying to learn how things worked. But no one at school knew that. To them, she was just the quiet girl with the weird notebook. Sometimes she overheard what they said. She's so weird. Why does she always draw those creepy robot things? I bet she doesn't have any friends. They weren't wrong. She didn't have friends. Not because she didn't want them, but because no one ever tried to understand her. And after a while, she stopped trying to explain. During lunch breaks, she would sit alone under the big oak tree near the fence. It was her favorite spot. Quiet, shaded, with just enough breeze to make the grass dance. She would open her sketchbook there, too. The one place she could draw without feeling watched. One afternoon, a group of students walked by. They were laughing about something when one of them noticed her. "Hey," he said, "what are you always drawing anyway?" She looked up, startled, clutching the book closer. "Nothing," she said softly. "Come on, let's see." Another one said, reaching for it. Before she could react, they had grabbed it from her hands. The pages flipped open in the wind, revealing her sketches. They stared for a second, confused, then amused. "What is this stuff? Robot arms? Are you building a transformer or something?" The others laughed. One of them held the book up like it was a joke, waving it around. "Hey, look everyone, she's planning to take over the world." She felt her face burn. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to take it back. "Please," she whispered. "Give it back." They laughed harder. Finally, a teacher walked by and told them to stop fooling around. The group tossed the sketchbook on the ground and walked off, still laughing. She picked it up carefully, dusted it off, and held it close again. The edges were torn, and one of her favorite drawings had a footprint across it. That night, she didn't go to her shed. She just sat on her bed staring at the sketchbook. She thought about throwing it away. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was silly to think she could ever make something like that. She was just a kid who didn't fit in, not a scientist, not an inventor. But then she heard her brother's voice from the other room. He was laughing at something on TV, the kind of carefree laugh that always made her smile. She looked down at the torn page again and ran her fingers over the lines she had drawn. "No," she whispered. "I'm not done yet." The next morning she woke up early and went to the shed again. She tightened a few bolts on a small plastic arm she'd been working on. It wasn't perfect and it barely moved, but it was something. Every little improvement made her feel like she was one step closer. At school, the whispers didn't stop. The story of her robot notebook spread fast. Some called her the robot girl. Others pretended to talk like machines whenever she walked by. She learned to ignore them, but deep down it hurt. Every time they laughed, she felt a little smaller, a little more invisible. The teachers noticed, but they didn't say much. She wasn't causing trouble, so they let it slide. One or two of them tried to be kind, but they didn't understand either. They thought she was just a quiet student who liked drawing. No one ever asked what the drawings meant. Weeks turned into months and nothing changed. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. Wake up, go to school, get through it, go home, draw, and dream. Until one day something unexpected happened. During science class, the teacher announced a school-wide project, a design and innovation fair. Students could create anything they wanted, a model, a machine, a small invention, and present it in front of the school. Most of the class groaned, but she froze. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe this was her chance. Maybe she could finally show them what she'd been working on, not to prove anything, but to be seen for who she really was. That night, she couldn't sleep. Ideas flooded her mind faster than she could sketch them. She wanted to build a small version of her design, something that actually worked, something her brother could try. But she didn't have the money for materials. Her family barely had enough for bills, so she started collecting things. Broken toys, discarded tools, scraps from the junkyard near her father's shop. Piece by piece, she gathered what she needed. Her brother helped too, even though he didn't fully understand what she was building. He would hand her screws or hold things in place with his good arm, smiling the whole time. "You're really good at this," he told her once. That one sentence meant more to her than anything anyone at school had ever said. As the fair drew closer, she worked harder than ever. Late nights turned into early mornings. Her hands were covered in tiny cuts from wires and tools, but she didn't care. Each turn of the screwdriver, each tiny click of the mechanism, brought her dream closer to life. But she still kept it secret. No one at school knew what she was making. She wanted to surprise them, maybe even make them see her differently. She didn't know then that her secret would soon be exposed in the cruelest way possible. For now, she held on to hope. A quiet, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, her moment was coming. And while everyone laughed behind her back, she was busy building something that would one day make the whole world stop laughing. The morning of the school assembly started like any other day. The quiet girl walked into school holding her old backpack and the same sketchbook she always carried. Her shoes squeaked softly against the shiny floor as students filled the hallways, laughing, shouting, living their ordinary lives. She kept her head down as usual and tried not to draw attention. It had been a few weeks since the design fair was announced, and she'd been working harder than ever. Every free moment she was sketching new ideas, building small models, testing how things could move. Her dream was getting closer, though no one else could see it yet. She wanted to surprise everyone on that day, to finally show that her strange drawings had a purpose. But life at school hadn't gotten any easier. The whispers continued. The laughter behind her back grew louder. People pointed, called her names, made robot noises when she walked by. It wasn't funny to her, but she had learned to stay silent. Silence was safer than fighting back. That morning, something felt different, though. The hallways were filled with more excitement than usual. The assembly was for the school's annual Talent and Inspiration Day, where students shared performances, speeches, or short presentations. She didn't plan to join it. Crowds made her nervous, and she didn't like being on stage. But fate had other plans. When she reached her locker, she noticed something odd. Her sketchbook was missing. She remembered putting it in her bag the night before. Her heart raced as she searched through her backpack again, her notebooks, pencils, papers. But the sketchbook wasn't there. She froze. That book wasn't just paper and ink. It was her world. It had every design she had ever made, every idea for her brother's arm, every thought she was too shy to say out loud. Losing it felt like losing a part of herself. She asked around quietly, but no one had seen it. Some students smirked when she asked. One girl shrugged and said, "Maybe it walked away on its own. Robot girl." She turned and walked off before they could see the tears forming in her eyes. Later that day, everyone gathered in the gym for the assembly. The bleachers were full, the stage decorated with colorful banners. The principal spoke first, talking about school spirit and creativity. Then one by one students went up to perform. Some sang, some danced, some showed funny videos. Laughter echoed through the big hall. She sat near the back, her hands folded in her lap, trying to disappear among the crowd. Her thoughts kept drifting to her missing sketchbook. Maybe someone had taken it. Maybe it was gone forever. Then, halfway through the assembly, the lights dimmed a little and the big screen behind the stage flickered on. A teacher announced, "Up next, we have a little surprise presentation submitted by a few students. Let's see what they prepared." The screen came to life. At first, it showed a few pages. Black and white drawings, strange blueprints, detailed sketches of gears and metal arms. Her heart stopped. It was her sketchbook. Her breath caught in her throat as the camera zoomed in on the pages. Her private designs, her notes, even the messy scribbles she'd written in the corners. A loud wave of laughter spread across the gym. Some students pointed, others whispered loudly. "What is this?" Someone shouted. "Robot parts? Is she building an army or something?" Another joked. The laughter grew louder. The teacher on stage looked confused, flipping through the slides that had clearly been put together without permission. Someone in the back yelled, "That's the robot girl's notebook." Now everyone was looking at her. She felt her stomach twist. The gym spun around her as hundreds of eyes turned in her direction. Her face went pale. She wanted to disappear, to run out of the building and never come back, but she couldn't move. The screen showed another page, one with her brother's name written next to a drawing of a prosthetic arm. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears welled up. That page wasn't just a design. It was personal. It was the reason she had started drawing in the first place. A teacher finally rushed to turn off the screen, and the principal stepped forward to calm the crowd. But the damage was done. Laughter still echoed in her head as she grabbed her bag and ran out of the gym. Outside, she didn't stop running until she reached the back of the school, where no one could see her. She leaned against the cold brick wall, breathing hard, her vision blurry with tears. She didn't care if anyone saw her cry now. Everything she had kept private had been turned into a joke. For the rest of the day, she stayed hidden in the library. She didn't eat lunch. She didn't talk to anyone. Her mind kept replaying the scene, the laughter, the screen, her drawings up there for everyone to mock. When the final bell rang, she walked home slowly, dragging her feet along the sidewalk. The wind was cold, but she barely felt it. At home, her mother noticed something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." She didn't tell her what had happened. She couldn't. The thought of saying it out loud made her feel sick. That night, she sat in her small workshop staring at her half-finished project. Her tools were scattered across the table, tiny metal pieces glinting under the single bulb. She picked up a screwdriver but couldn't bring herself to continue. Every time she tried, she saw their faces laughing again. For the first time in years, she thought about quitting. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was strange. Maybe no one would ever take her seriously. She leaned forward and buried her face in her hands. The tears came quietly at first, then heavier. Her shoulders shook as she cried, not just for the humiliation, but for the dream that suddenly felt impossible. After a while, she heard a soft knock on the door. Her little brother peeked in, holding a small flashlight. "What are you doing?" he asked. She wiped her eyes quickly. "Nothing. Just thinking." He walked in and looked at her desk. "Are you fixing the hand thing again?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Not tonight." He climbed onto the stool next to her and picked up a tiny piece of plastic from the table. "You know, I think it's really cool what you're making," he said with a smile. "When it's done, I bet it's going to work great." Something inside her softened. For a moment, the laughter from school faded away. She looked at her brother, his eyes full of trust and hope. "You really think so?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, You're the smartest person I know. She smiled faintly, though her heart still ached. Thanks. When he left, she sat there in silence for a long time. His words replayed in her head. The smartest person I know. She turned the light back on. Slowly, she picked up her tools again. Her hands were shaky, but she started to work. Each small movement, each careful twist of the screwdriver, was a step away from the pain of that day. She reminded herself why she had started. Not to impress anyone, not to win an award, but to help someone she loved. The next morning, she went back to school. People still whispered when she walked by, but she didn't look at them. She kept her eyes straight ahead. Some of the students who had shared her drawings tried to talk to her, pretending it was a harmless joke. "We didn't mean to upset you," one said. "It was just for fun," she didn't reply. She just walked past them, but deep down, something inside her had changed. She wasn't angry, not exactly. She was hurt, yes, but she was also more determined. They had taken her secret and turned it into a joke, but she decided that one day, she'd make something so real, so powerful, that no one would ever laugh again. Weeks passed, and though the whispers lingered, she went back to working quietly on her design. The laughter had left a scar, but it also lit a fire inside her. What no one knew was that the same project they mocked would soon draw attention from someone far beyond her school, someone who would see what others couldn't, and when that day came, the laughter would stop for good. The days after the assembly felt long and heavy. The quiet girl walked through school hallways as if she wasn't really there. People still looked at her and whispered, but now it was quieter, not because they felt sorry, but because they had already moved on. For them, it was just another funny story, another day of gossip. But for her, it was a memory that wouldn't stop replaying. She stopped sitting under the big tree during lunch. She stopped going to the library after class. Even her sketchbook, now returned to her by the principal, stayed locked inside her drawer at home. The pages were bent and wrinkled, a painful reminder of how her private dream had been turned into a public joke. But one small thing changed everything. It started with a knock on the classroom door. The principal walked in, followed by a man no one recognized. He wore glasses, carried a leather folder, and had the calm look of someone used to being listened to. The teacher paused mid-sentence as both of them spoke quietly for a moment. Then the principal looked up. "Could you step outside for a moment?" he asked her gently. The room went quiet. Everyone stared as she slowly stood up and followed them into the hallway. She felt a wave of nervousness. She hadn't done anything wrong, but she hated attention. Outside, the man smiled kindly. "Hello," he said. "I'm visiting from the local university. My name is Dr. Collins. Your school principal showed me some of your drawings." Her stomach turned cold. The drawings. She thought they were gone for good. I didn't mean for anyone to see them," she said quietly. "I understand," the man said softly. "But you should know, they're quite extraordinary." She blinked, unsure what he meant. Extraordinary? He opened his folder and pulled out a few printed copies of her sketches. "These designs," he said, pointing to one, "show a deep understanding of mechanical movement, especially for someone your age. Where did you learn to draw like this?" She hesitated, glancing at the principal, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "I didn't really learn, I just tried things," she said. "I watch videos sometimes, read about machines. I like figuring out how they work." Dr. Collins smiled. "That's called engineering." She felt her cheeks warm. No one had ever said that word to her before. He continued, "When I saw your designs, I thought they looked a lot like real prototypes for prosthetic arms. Are you designing something specific?" She looked down at her shoes, unsure if she should tell him, but something in his voice felt safe. "For my little brother," she said finally. "He lost his arm a few years ago. I want to build one that's light and cheap, so he can use it easily." The man's smile grew softer. "That's a beautiful goal," he said. "And you're much closer than you think." He told her he worked at the local university's engineering department, and that he often helped students who were passionate about inventing. He offered to show her lab equipment and materials that could help her understand her ideas better. At first, she didn't know what to say. No teacher had ever said her work was good before. No one had called it extraordinary. It felt strange, but in a good way. That evening, when she told her parents about it, her father almost dropped his wrench. "A professor wants to see your work?" he asked, surprised. She nodded shyly. Her mother smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. You see? Your hard work is being noticed. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of pride. Maybe what happened at the assembly wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning. The next weekend, she went with her father to meet Dr. Collins at the university. The building was large, filled with machines that hummed and clicked, tables lined with small gadgets, and students in white coats moving around with focused faces. He showed her a room full of 3D printers and explained how they could create lightweight parts for prosthetics. She watched in amazement as the machine slowly built a tiny plastic piece layer by layer. It looked almost like magic. Dr. Collins turned to her and said, "With your designs and a bit of practice using these tools, you could make a real prototype." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Absolutely," he said. "You have the talent. You just need the opportunity." He gave her permission to visit the lab on weekends to learn and experiment. It was something she never thought would happen to someone like her. When she returned home that night, she opened her old sketchbook again. The torn pages didn't look so sad anymore. She picked up her pencil and started sketching a new design, one that was simpler, stronger, and could actually move like a real arm. At school, people noticed that she looked different, not louder, not prouder, but more focused. She didn't care about the whispers anymore. Every day after classes, she went straight to the university lab, where she learned how to use design software, how to test materials, and how to make her drawings come to life. Her small dream started turning into something real. One evening, after weeks of testing, she held in her hands a small, working model of a robotic arm. It wasn't perfect, the fingers moved stiffly and some joints still needed adjustment, but it moved. It actually moved. She couldn't stop smiling. When she brought it home, her brother's eyes went wide. "Does it work?" he asked. "Try it," she said, helping him attach the light frame to his shoulder. She flipped a tiny switch connected to a small battery. The fingers twitched, then slowly curled into a fist. Her brother gasped. "It's moving." Her parents stood in the doorway, stunned. Her father rubbed his eyes like he couldn't believe it. Her mother covered her mouth in surprise. She laughed softly, tears filling her eyes. "It's not finished yet," she said, "but it's a start." That night she couldn't sleep. Her mind buzzed with new ideas. Ways to make the hand stronger, faster, easier to control. She wasn't thinking about the kids who laughed at her anymore. She was thinking about what she could do next. The following week, Dr. Collins visited her school to give a talk about innovation and creativity. During his presentation, he mentioned a young student who had designed something remarkable, though he didn't say her name at first. He described her passion, her persistence, and her wish to help her family. The students started whispering. Some already guessed who he was talking about. Then he said, "I believe she deserves recognition for her work, not laughter." He invited her to the stage. For a second, she froze in her seat. Her heart pounded as she stood up and walked slowly to the front. She could feel everyone's eyes on her again. But this time it felt different. Dr. Collins handed her a small certificate saying, "You have a mind that can change lives. Never let anyone make you feel small for thinking differently." The gym was silent. Not a single laugh. Not a whisper. Just quiet awe. She looked out at the crowd, the same faces that had laughed at her before, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. After the assembly, a few students came up to her. Some said congratulations, others just smiled awkwardly. A few even apologized. She nodded politely, though she didn't hold grudges. She didn't need to. Her work had spoken louder than any insult ever could. That weekend, Dr. Collins invited her to present her project at a regional youth innovation fair. She hesitated, she wasn't used to attention, but he told her, "This isn't about fame. It's about showing others that passion can come from anywhere." She agreed. In the days leading up to the fair, she worked harder than ever, improving her design and learning how to explain it to others. Her brother helped test the new version, and each time it moved a little better. He grinned wider. The night before the fair, her father hugged her and said, "No matter what happens tomorrow, you've already made us proud." The next day, she stood in a large hall filled with bright lights and rows of displays from young inventors across the region. Some projects were huge and complex, others small but clever. She felt nervous, but when people came to her booth and saw the arm move, Their faces lit up with curiosity and admiration. She told them about her idea, how she wanted to make prosthetics affordable for families who couldn't afford expensive ones. She spoke softly, but every word came from the heart. By the end of the day, her table had drawn one of the biggest crowds. She didn't know if she'd win anything. That wasn't why she came. But deep down, she already felt like she had won, because the truth had finally come out. All those nights in the shed, all those tears, all that laughter behind her back. It had led her here, to this moment, and as she packed up her things that evening, she looked around the bright, buzzing room full of dreamers and thought to herself, maybe I belong here after all. The morning of the regional fair was bright and full of nervous excitement. The quiet girl stood near her small table, looking at the mechanical arm she had built. The silver frame shimmered softly under the hall's bright lights. Her hands trembled a little as she adjusted one of the wires, trying to make sure everything was perfect. Around her, students from different schools were setting up their projects. Some had tall, shiny displays filled with colorful posters. Others had robots that rolled on wheels or machines that beeped and blinked. She didn't have anything fancy, just her prototype, her sketchbook, and a small sign that said, Affordable Prosthetic Arm Project. Her father had helped her carry everything into the hall that morning. He stood nearby, smiling proudly, even though he didn't fully understand all the technical things she had made. You did all this, he whispered. No matter what happens, I'm already proud. She smiled nervously. Thanks, Dad. When the fair officially began, groups of visitors and judges walked through the aisles, stopping at each table to ask questions. She felt her heart beat faster every time someone came close. She wasn't used to explaining her work in front of people, but when the first judge stopped at her booth, something changed. He leaned down, studying the small arm on the table. Tell me about this, he said kindly. She swallowed hard. It's a prosthetic arm, she began softly. I designed it for my little brother. The idea is to make it light and low cost, so that families who can't afford expensive prosthetics can still get one. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. And you built this yourself? Yes, she said. Mostly from recycled materials. The parts are printed with a 3D printer, and the joints move with small motors. It can grip small things like a cup or a pencil. She picked up a small remote and turned the arm on. The fingers twitched, then slowly closed around a plastic cup. The judges watched closely as she explained how the design worked. Her voice was quiet at first, but the more she talked, the steadier it became. For once, she didn't feel strange talking about her ideas. She felt proud. When the demonstration ended, one of the judges smiled. This is remarkable, he said. And you're only in high school? She nodded shyly. Before moving on, they thanked her and took notes on their clipboards. As they walked away, her father squeezed her shoulder. You did great, he said. The day went by quickly after that. More visitors came asking about her project. Some were teachers, others were college students or parents. Everyone seemed amazed when they learned she had done most of the work on her own. For the first time in her life, she felt like people were seeing her for who she really was. Not the quiet girl who sat alone, not the robot girl everyone mocked, but someone with a purpose. When the fair ended, the organizers called everyone together for the announcement of the winners. She didn't expect anything. She had already gotten more than she'd ever dreamed of. People had listened to her story and they had understood. As the host read out the awards, she clapped politely for the winners. Then suddenly she heard her project's name being announced. Her breath caught. The Special Recognition Award for Innovation and Social Impact goes to... They said her name. For a moment she froze in place. Her father nudged her gently. Go on, he whispered. She walked up to the stage feeling like her feet were floating. The crowd clapped warmly. When she reached the microphone, she didn't know what to say at first. She looked at the small medal they handed her and then at the faces watching. I just wanted to help someone I love, she said softly. I never thought anyone would notice. Thank you for seeing me. Her voice trembled, but the applause grew louder. That night, her family went out to a small diner to celebrate. Her little brother couldn't stop talking about how proud he was. You're famous now, he said with a grin. She laughed. Not famous, just lucky. But deep down, she knew it wasn't luck. It was years of being misunderstood, years of trying, failing, and trying again. The next morning, something unexpected happened. An article about the fair appeared in the local newspaper. Her picture was there, standing beside her project, smiling nervously. The headline read, "Teen invents affordable prosthetic arm for children." People in her town started noticing her in a new way. Neighbors stopped her parents in the grocery store to say congratulations. Her teachers shared the article on the school's website. Even the students who had laughed at her months before started treating her differently. At school, when she walked through the hallways, people didn't whisper or giggle anymore. Some smiled, some even said hello. But she didn't let it go to her head. She knew how quickly things could change. She still sat in her usual spot during lunch, still carried her sketchbook, still spent evenings working in her shed. Only now she had a new purpose, to make her design even better. A few weeks later, Dr. Collins visited her home with exciting news. "I've been speaking with a non-profit organization," he said. "They help provide medical equipment to children in need. They're very interested in your design." Her heart jumped. "Really?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "They'd like to meet you and see if your model could be developed into a full prototype for distribution." It felt unreal. The same sketches that had once made everyone laugh were now opening doors she never thought possible. When she met the team from the organization, they were kind and encouraging. They asked her to explain her process, her challenges, and her goals. She showed them her drawings, the notes in her old sketchbook, and even a few of her early failed attempts. One of the engineers said, "You've done incredible work with almost nothing. Imagine what you could do with proper tools and support." They offered her access to better materials and even proposed a mentorship program to help her develop her skills further. She couldn't stop smiling. At home, she shared the news with her family. Her father hugged her tightly. "You see," he said, his voice full of emotion, "all those nights in the shed weren't for nothing." Her mother wiped away tears. "You've turned all that pain into something beautiful," she whispered. Her brother held up his arm and said proudly, "And it works because of you." That night, she stayed up late in her room, looking through her old drawings. Some of them were smudged and torn from the day they had been projected on the school screen. She ran her fingers over the lines, remembering how embarrassed she had felt. Now those same pages were her greatest achievement. The next few months moved fast. The nonprofit's engineers worked with her to improve her design, adding sensors that allowed the arm to respond to small muscle movements. They helped her build a lighter, more flexible version. She watched in awe as her ideas turned into something professional, something real. When they finished the first advanced prototype, they tested it on her brother again. This time the fingers moved smoothly. He picked up a ball, squeezed it, then threw it into the air, laughing. "It's perfect," he shouted. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Not perfect," she said, "but close." A few days later, a local news crew came to film their story. They interviewed her, her family, and even Dr. Collins. She was nervous in front of the camera, but the reporter spoke gently, asking about her journey. She said, "People laughed at me once, but I think sometimes laughter comes from not understanding. I don't blame them. I just hope they see now that everyone has something special inside, even if it takes time to notice." The video went viral online. Comments poured in from strangers around the world, messages of admiration, encouragement, and gratitude. Some people said her story inspired them to chase their own dreams. Others shared how they too had been laughed at for being different. Her story had become bigger than her pain. At school, the principal called her to the office again, but this time it was to congratulate her. "You've brought pride to our school," he said warmly. "You've shown everyone what perseverance looks like." A few of her classmates approached her too. One of them, the same boy who had once taken her sketchbook, looked nervous as he spoke. "I'm sorry for what we did," he said. "I didn't realize what you were going through." She nodded softly. "It's okay," she said, "just don't do that to anyone else." He nodded back, ashamed but grateful for her forgiveness. By the end of that year, her project had received national attention. She was invited to speak at a youth innovation event. Standing on the big stage, looking out at hundreds of people, she felt a wave of disbelief. She took a deep breath and said, "There was a time when I thought being different was a bad thing, but now I know it's what makes us special. If people laugh at your dreams, don't stop, because one day the same people who laughed might be the ones who applaud you." The audience stood and clapped. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. And as she stepped off the stage, she realized something powerful. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. The truth had already spoken for her. The years that followed changed everything. The quiet girl who once sat alone in the back of the classroom was no longer invisible. Her invention, the affordable prosthetic arm, had started to spread beyond her small town. What began as a personal project for her brother grew into something much bigger, something that was touching lives across the world. It started small. The nonprofit that partnered with her began producing her design on a larger scale. The first few models were sent to children in nearby hospitals. Photos and letters started coming in, kids smiling with their new prosthetic arms, families thanking her for giving their children a chance to play, write, and feel confident again. Every time she saw one of those letters, she felt a warmth that words couldn't describe. At home, her little brother had become her biggest supporter. He wore his new arm proudly everywhere he went. Whenever someone asked about it, he would say, "My sister made it." That sentence alone made every sleepless night worth it. Even though she had become well known, she stayed humble. She still helped her parents with chores, still worked late in her small shed behind the house. It wasn't about fame for her. It was about purpose. She started traveling to nearby schools to talk about her project. She was nervous every time she stood in front of a crowd, but once she began speaking, the words came naturally. She shared how her idea was born out of love, and how being laughed at once gave her the strength to keep going. Many of the students she spoke to reminded her of her younger self, shy, unsure, afraid of being different. When she finished her talks, they would come up to her with bright eyes saying things like, "I want to invent something too," or "You made me believe I can do it." Those moments became her new motivation. A few months later, a major news channel invited her for an interview. It was the first time she had ever been in a professional studio. The lights were bright and the cameras felt intimidating. The host smiled and said, "You've inspired so many people. What kept you going when things were difficult?" She thought for a moment before answering softly, "I think love did. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to help my brother. And sometimes when you do something with love, it grows into something bigger than you ever imagined." Her voice trembled a little, but her eyes were steady. The host smiled warmly. "That's beautiful," he said. When the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people she had never met. Some shared stories about their struggles, their dreams, or how they'd been laughed at too. Others offered support, wanting to donate or volunteer. It was amazing and a little overwhelming. But through it all, she stayed grounded. At school, life had completely changed. The same students who once mocked her now looked up to her. Some even started joining the science club, saying she inspired them to create something meaningful. The teachers, who once didn't notice her, proudly spoke of her accomplishments in every meeting. But she didn't let the attention make her forget where she came from. Every time someone congratulated her, she would smile and say, "Thank you, but I'm just getting started." One day, while visiting the university lab, Dr. Collins pulled her aside. "You know," he said, "your story has gone further than you think. A technology institute overseas wants to collaborate with us to improve your design for wider use. They're offering a scholarship if you'd like to study engineering after graduation." Her eyes widened. "A scholarship?" "Yes," he said with a grin. "You've earned it." That night, she sat quietly in her room staring at the acceptance letter. The words didn't feel real. A few years ago, she had been the girl people whispered about in the hallways. Now she was being invited to study something she loved. Her parents hugged her tightly. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "You did this," she said softly. "You changed your life with your own hands," her father added, "and ours too." The next morning, she walked to the old oak tree behind her school, the same tree where she used to sit alone, sketching her strange drawings. She sat there for a long time, remembering everything. The laughter, the humiliation, the tears, and the quiet nights when she almost gave up.